Thank you for joining us today. We've got a very important show with some very important information, so I'm going to jump right into it. Our three guests today, first, Jan Peery, who's the director of the Oklahoma City YWCA, Christy Baker, who's on the board of directors of the YWCA, and Chief Bill Citty, the chief of the Oklahoma City Police Department, is with us as well today. And unfortunately, we've got a very difficult subject to discuss, but one that's is very important as well. And we are so grateful in Oklahoma City to have both the YWCA to assist with this problem, as well as the Oklahoma City Police Department. And I know with Chief City's understanding and concern, it just filters down, and I think we've got a great police department to work with this area. But what we're going to talk about, unfortunately, is domestic violence and how the YWCA works to assist victims of this problem. So Jan, could you start us off with just a little bit of information about what the YWCA and maybe even some of the statistics related to domestic violence here in Oklahoma City?
Well, I appreciate you having us here because it is a very serious subject. In Oklahoma, we're 11th in the nation basically for women killed by men. So not in a good place to be. 1 in 4 women will be a victim of domestic violence. When there's a death from child abuse, there's a pattern of abuse against the mother at least 70% of the time. So it's a very serious subject. It impacts us economically as well as the quality of life in our community. So at the YWCA, we're the only certified shelter for victims of domestic violence services. We're licensed through the Attorney General's office by law. And what we do is we provide that safe haven from residential services. We have emergency shelter for those victims needing to get out to Safe Point right now, to transitional housing and some permanent supportive housing. We do counseling, and there's a lot of wonderful counselors around, but our counselors, I tell everybody, they're the heart surgeons. They have that specific training in domestic violence to know really how to dig deeper and to help really in a way that is also safety informed as well as trauma informed. We work in the schools to help the kids know. Of course, we have no violence in our schools. None of us have that, but we help those kids understand healthy relationships and how to identify when they need help and what are the red flags. Yeah. And those are some of the key services for our victims.
Well, the worst thing that could happen is for somebody to ignore the problem and think it's just going to go away and take care of itself. Is that a fair statement?
Oklahoma has a domestic violence fatality review board, and they look at those deaths who have already been adjudicated. And over the last 11 years, they have one key element is that 95% of those homicide victims never accessed domestic violence services. So we know that when we can work with them, we can help them understand the dynamics and help keep them safer.
Great. Now, Chief City, the Oklahoma City Police Department looks upon the YWCA kind of as a partner. Is that true with respect to domestic violence and when you get called out in those types of situations?
Well, we're real fortunate to have the YWCA as a partner, and we have really probably for at least 20 years or longer. And we actually have one of their employees, and the city helps support the cost of that employee every year to act as a victim's advocate specifically for domestic violence. And that person has an office within the Oklahoma City Police Department and works directly with the investigators in our domestic violence unit to assist and help victims access programs, services that they may need, whether it's the YWCA or other services throughout the community.
Right. And while we often think of this being a problem among spouses, it also impacts the children. Is that
right? We probably work about 126 domestic violent cases a week. Boy. We have about 10 investigators, and we're 3 short now, but 126 cases affect probably at least 200 kids. In most cases, families have children involved. So you're working the case involving maybe the spouse, but the children are also impacted. They may be impacted physically, or they may be impacted mentally. Either way, the YWCA offers a great place and a safe haven, not only just to get them out of that situation, to try to break that cycle that they're in, but also it helps them try to access services for a long-term solution to their situation.
Right. And Jan, this does have a generational impact, doesn't it? Once it begins in a household, it may carry through to the children, and then when they become adults.
Yeah, very often, because it's a learned behavior. Domestic violence is about power and control, but when a child sees this is how somebody gets what they want, they begin to learn that. Yeah. Or as the young female in the household, she may understand that, well, this is what I am to expect in a relationship. And so very often, I think the numbers that are often used are 7 out of 10 will repeat the cycle, either by becoming an abuser or marrying an abuser. Oh. So it's real important to get involved with those families at an early age so we can maybe help break that cycle of violence.
Yes. Now, Christy, if we may visit with you for just a moment, you have some experience with this, both unfortunately as a victim and now on the board of directors for the YWCA. I think you were saying that you were not aware of the services at the YWCA, and I'm sure that's probably the majority of the people out there. So when this problem began, you really didn't know who to turn to or how to access help. Could you kind of tell us a little bit, just from your own experience as to that process?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I really had no idea that there were services anywhere for people who were stuck in a situation like I was. I was subjected to verbal, mental, emotional, physical violence every day. And there's a great deal, as Jan said, a great deal of control that's going on. So where you go and what you do and who you see and anything and everything about your everyday life is controlled by that other person. So you begin to feel as if there's absolutely no room for you to move in any direction. They know where you are, they control who you see, who you talk to, all of those things. And so it's very hard to understand and know that there are services out there.
And when this problem begins to present itself, it normally just doesn't go away and take care of itself. Often it escalates. And could you share a little bit more about your own personal situation?
It absolutely does not go away. When I met the man that was then my husband, he was charming and lovely to be around, absolutely persuasive and wonderful in every way. And it wasn't long after he knew that we were committed that I began to see the controlling and violent behavior. So most of the time, the abuser is very, very good at bringing that person in, and then as soon as they feel as though that's solidified, the violence and the danger really begins. And for me, from the very first time that I was verbally abused, it was a matter of days until I was physically abused. Mm-hmm. So, and that was ongoing, and it went so far as to threaten my life.
Right. And so it continues to escalate, and then I believe you were saying one day, as you were going to work, or
yes,
it kind of came to a head as far as the issues. Can you share with that?
Sure. It actually began in an evening. I came home from an outing, and I walked into the house, and it was completely dark. And I walked all the way through. I saw a cigarette lit from the sofa in the dark, and I knew that things were very bad. So I walked directly through, trying to get back to the back bedroom and close the door without really being noticed or followed. And I had barely made it into the room when I was dragged back to the sofa by my hair. I was forced to sit with my back straight, my feet flat on the floor, my hands in my lap for hours as I was told what was going to happen the next day. And in essence, what was going to happen was that I would be allowed to leave for work that day, but that he would follow, and he would take a roll of quarters, place them in his hand, make a fist, and send the bridge of my nose through my brain, killing me instantly.
I'm sorry to have to continue this story, but you go on to work, and that's when you first hear about
It
those
is.
services.
It is. I went into work, and much to my surprise, a coworker had shown up early that day. It wasn't at all a normal occurrence, and she was there early that day. And I walked in persuading her, trying to persuade her to leave because I was telling her what was getting ready to happen. And instead, she took a piece of notebook paper and wrote a number on it and tore it off and handed it to me. And she said for me to call that number while she called another number, while she called the police. And so I called the number and I had the conversation, and about that time my then husband showed up, and the woman stood in the doorway allowing me to get to my car and get in my car. And although he followed me, I was able to get to the YWCA safely.
Great.
The number on the piece of paper was to the YWCA.
Okay. And then, unfortunately, the story doesn't end there, and there's some legal action that takes place, but can you tell us kind of beyond that aspect of it,
Sure.
how it kind of ends up?
I stayed at the shelter for 6 weeks, and thanks to the services that they had even then, they were able to work within the community to get me in a position that I was able to go home. And so after 6 weeks, I went home, and I was there less than 72 hours when I had my first outing. And that's a really exciting thing after having been, fairly captive for a long time. And so I went on the outing with my friends, and through a series of circumstances, I got separated from the person who was to make sure I was safely home. So while I waited for them to backtrack and then come back to my home to find me, I just waited in the house alone for 20 minutes or longer. And they came and came in the door, and when I closed the door behind them, I noticed that there was glass on the floor and a roll of duct tape on the table. And it wasn't until that moment that I really saw those things. So the neighbor decided to check my house while I called the police department, gave them my information and my VPO, because I had a victim's protective order.
Yes.
And while I was doing that, the neighbor walked out into the parking lot to lead the police to where I was. And so I was there again for a few minutes alone as that happened. What I didn't know was that my ex-husband was hiding in the closet in my bedroom with an 8.5-inch blade hunting knife with serrated edge, with tape for my hands, my feet, and my mouth. And I found him there as the police were on the phone verifying my information. I found him there in my closet and ran out the front door as they were running past me in the hall to arrest him and take him to jail. I was at the police station for several hours after that, giving my statement and information. And the officer who arrested came in to tell me that they had located his truck, which was parked a block and a half away, and in the back were sheets and a shovel.
Well, I am so glad that you were able to get through that situation. I know it's very difficult to relive that and share that, but I think it's so important for people to become aware of the potential for that type of action to take place. And I know that's what the YWCA is trying to do, is first of all, warn potential victims of this, and secondly, let them know that there is hope and assistance.
Right. The awareness is key. The more people understand that there are services available, the more chances a victim will get to services to become survivors.
Right. Now, one of the problems you're currently experiencing is a lack of space, and I think you say you're 99.99% occupied all the time. And to alleviate that, you're beginning a campaign to double the size. Is that correct?
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We do. We stay full all the time, and what that means is someone can't get into services and can't get that safety net. And so while we work to try to help them get somewhere else, a lot of the other shelters around the state are also finding that we're full. I think the more we're getting the word out that there's services, the more people are coming to services.
Yes.
So our current shelter will house up to 55 people, a maximum. That's sometimes putting them on cots and on the floor, whatever else we need to do to try to keep them safe. And the new one will house, we'll start with at least 85 beds.
Great.
And it'll be able to house up to just over 100.
And so I'm sorry we're kind of running out of time, but for people who'd like to get involved and assist either as a volunteer or to provide some funding, they can contact you or go to the website.
Yes.
And to receive additional information.
Right, absolutely.
If I could just weigh in on that a little bit, I'd like to put in a plug for that. I mean, if you want a great place to put your money, this is the only facility in Oklahoma City that provides this type of service to our victims, to our domestic violence victims. There is no place else that can protect them. You know, police alone can't do that. No. VPOs can't completely do that. This is the only place in Oklahoma City. And, you know, like I tell people, I said, if you want a good place, a place that you're going to put your money that's going to save lives, then the expansion of the YWCA is a good place to do it. So,
well, thank all three of you for joining us. We really do need to get this information out to the public, and I wish we didn't have this problem, but again, we're thankful that we've got the YWCA and Chief City and the Oklahoma City Police Department to help address that problem. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.